which was 1943, to read more of the Japanese naval code than they thought we could. And we read the message that said that Yamamoto was going to be visiting Bougainville, particular date, particular time. One of the things we knew about Admiral Yamamoto is he was always on time. And that was good because our aircraft, which we were going to try to intercept him, had to fly 300 miles to get to Bougainville, could only stay 10 minutes, and then had to fly back. So we didn't have much time, but we got there just in time to shoot him down, and we killed him. And that was a cryptographic coup, which was not generally thought of as being good, because the Japanese would know that we had broken their code if we had this information. Well, we ignored that. And as a matter of fact, they were so stunned by it that they did not take any action. Well, anyway, they are some of the war stories. But after my stint in the Army, which was a year and a month and 5 days, I was released as a civilian. And I got a job in Philadelphia with a place called J.W. Foster. It was on Broad Street, about Girard Avenue. And I was a draftsman. I just did nothing but draw pictures. The thing that we were using as a test vehicle was the material which we now know as Krylon. J.W. Foster people in 1947 said they had invented it. Maybe true, maybe not. Doesn't make any difference. But what we would do is to use this Krylon to spray on mechanical drawings to protect them from the environment. It would keep them from getting dirty, keep the paper from crinkling up. And my job was to take a piece of paper that had a diagram on it, copy the diagram on the side of it, alongside it, and spray one of the two with Krylon. And then they would use that as a sales pitch to show how difficult it was to damage the part that had the Krylon on it. That's all I did for 4 months. But then I went to work for the Philadelphia Inquirer as a draftsman again, very, very junior guy, and stayed there while until I graduated, or got started rather, at Penn again, and finished later on finished that. Left the Inquirer in 1951 and started with Westinghouse. And Westinghouse, I was an engineer by that time, and Westinghouse had a gas turbine division. It was called the Aviation Gas Turbine Division. They made jet engines, and that's what I went to work on, jet engines. And I was in what they called advanced development. And the main job we had in the advanced development group was to try to develop the most efficient turbine for a particular duty that we could. And then also when we've done that, we would realize that turbine would not work in the high temperatures of a real engine. So what we had to do is to take a turbine that worked real well, redesign it so that it could work in a jet engine. It had to be temperature resistant, it had to have more strength. And I brought samples of those here with me. Maybe afterwards we can take a look at these. One of each of those. And that was my design. However, I had a lot of help from people that really knew what they were doing, and that was not me. Later on, did a lot of other things too. And in 1956, moved from Philadelphia, which is where the Aviation Gas Turbine Division was located, down at the Westinghouse plant that's still at south of the airport in Essington. And moved away from there to Kansas City. And we moved to Kansas City because I was offered a job as the first of many supervisors of a computer group. Computers were very new in 1956. Everybody had one, but it was an experimental machine. And I worked with several of these experimental machines to try to reduce data from tests and have the data be useful. in doing this, I learned about the computers that different people had. The only companies that were actually making production computers, as opposed to experimental ones, were IBM, which was the big one, and Univac, which was number 2. And then there was also General Electric and Honeywell and Burroughs and 1 or 2 others. And they called them Snow White, that was IBM, and the Six Dwarfs. All the other guys were little compared to them. But because I was the only one that was interested in that sort of thing, and one of the reasons I was interested was because in Westinghouse was the, not Westinghouse, University of Pennsylvania was the manufacturer of the first big electronic computer, the ENIAC. It was located in the Moore School. And I was interested in that, and then, since I was going to school at Penn, I could go see it anytime I wanted to. And it turned out that I was the only person in the Westinghouse group that I was in that knew anything or cared anything about computers. So when they had to look for a supervisor, they picked me. But the supervisor's job was in Kansas City. So we moved to Kansas City, where my 3 kids were born, and stayed there until 1960. Another anecdote, if I may. I also worked on undersea warfare at the same time that I was supervising this computer group. And it resulted in a number of interesting things. One of the things is that there was a naval air station near Kansas City, just 20 miles to the west. And first of all, it's a naval air station in the middle of the country. But in addition to that, it was a place where they were doing undersea warfare. Undersea warfare in Kansas? Well, they were doing that. But it was also a naval base. And there were pilots there and airplanes. And I got to know a bunch of those guys because I liked airplanes. And they enjoyed talking about their experiences. Well, as a consequence of that, there was an incident where the general who was in charge of the Westinghouse division that I was a member of was a retired Air Force general whose main claim to fame, he said, was that he had flown every Navy airplane that had ever been built. So he wanted to come out to Kansas City because we were preparing the J-34 engine to go in a new airplane. It was going to be a trainer for the Navy. So he wanted to fly it. Well, he was the type of person you couldn't tell anything to. He wanted to fly the airplane, and he didn't want any instruction. He knows how to fly airplanes. So he took this thing off, and he flew it around, and everything was fine, until he tried to land it. He tried to land it the way the Air Force lands airplanes, which is different from the way the Navy does airplanes. And he almost crashed this thing short of the runway. But he did make it. What he didn't realize was that the Air Force method was to fly the downwind leg and then the base leg, and then you go to pick up the runway. And when you do that, you cut the engine if you're an Air Force guy, so that if the engine failed, you were on a glide path. But the glide path was quite steep, and so he was a little too steep. Well, he tried to make the engine run up at maximum speed, which takes a long while in a 1950s jet engine. 15 seconds to go from idle to military thrust. So he nearly crashed because the engine just leisurely speeded up and didn't provide much thrust for quite a while, but he made it. But he was furious. He wanted us at Westinghouse to redesign that engine. Now, this engine was already 15 years old, and so lots of things had happened in the meantime. But the Navy had chosen this engine because it was reliable. That's all they really cared about. They didn't care that it was inefficient. They just cared about it being safe. But the Air Force guy, no, it had to be Air Force style, and it was, but not much. Well, they picked me to explain to this general what had happened and why he was wrong. But I wasn't supposed to say anything like that, because you know what that would do to it.